The majority of the wild horses live on Bureau of Land Management land, BLM land.
They're not a natural part of this ecosystem. The science gets really lost, I think, in a lot of the emotion.
The Mustangs really connect well with people. They really bond quickly.
My name is Ginger Catherines, and I'm the Executive Director of the Cloud Foundation, and it's an organization that I started in 2005 after having spent since 1994 working on the wild horse issue. I felt that the Bureau of Land Management, that manages the majority of the horses on public lands, was managing them to extinction.
I'm Kathy Johnson. I'm Executive Director of Medicine Horse Program, and we are a mental health facility. We're a charity. We work with at-risk people and families, and we do therapy with them with horses. And we've been using the BLM Mustangs for the last almost 2 years now.
My name is David Lloyd, and I'm a public affairs specialist in northwestern Colorado. And as a public affairs specialist, I get involved in all the issues that are of importance to the public, and the wild horse issue certainly is one. So that's my familiarity with the program and with this particular herd management area.
If horses are not native to North America, where are they native of? There would be no horses in the world had we not had the native horse in North America go across the land bridge to Asia and beyond. And during numerous times in their evolutionary history, they made that journey. So because they died out in North America, had they never made that journey, we would never have the wonder of any horses. But what's happened is this has become a political issue, not a scientific, biological, evolutionary argument. This is a political argument that's been made by the Bureau of Land Management, who doesn't really care to manage the animals on public lands. They call them feral, they've called them exotic, they've called them pests, they've called for their destruction in the past. And they still are kind of preaching that same not native feral argument, which has no basis in science.
The genetics, and it's not, because they've been out there maybe a couple hundred years, but most of these horses in Colorado probably not even that long, really. And so you're not talking about like a wild population that's been in an area for thousands and thousands of years.
In 1971, the Wild Horse and Burro Act was created, and it was to protect the wild animals on these ranges. And they went out in the next 3 or 4 years, they identified 336 ranges where the horses lived. And now we have 179 of those ranges left. So over the years, they've just zeroed out herd after herd. But a critical issue right now is also the size of the herds that remain. Are they genetically viable?
When it looks like the genetics are getting too not diverse enough, we'll bring in, when we gather horses from one area, we'll bring a couple mares in, put it into the area that needs more diversity. And so that is something we're keeping a really close eye on.
But I imagine that breaking up those family groups is probably good for genetics, because I would think that there could be the potential of inbreeding if these horses don't mix the gene pool a little bit.
Science does not support us just leaving the horses alone and letting nature take its course.
They look at them as either exotic, feral, and to be gotten rid of, or they're livestock. So you manage them like livestock. They don't at all appreciate that they're a wildlife species and how they fit into their ecosystem, how important they are in the natural system of public lands. The Wild Horse and Burro Act says this, that they are to be considered as a natural part of the natural world out there. That BLM, that kind of like, flying by. They look at them, and the public land permittee that runs their cattle out there, look at them as competition for livestock grazing.
So, a lot of horse advocates have said because we do manage for livestock in areas where there's horses, they think it should just be for horses. We have a few areas that are like that, but the Wild Horse and Burro Act tells us to manage for both.
The horses are mainly rounded up with a helicopter. They're run for 10, 15, maybe even 20 miles over rugged terrain. So right away they're damaged when many of them are damaged or killed when they arrive at the capture site, the trap site. And so the very way in which the horses are captured is cruel and unusual punishment.
I honestly didn't think that the helicopters were terribly traumatic for these horses. I think they would feel the same as anybody chasing them on horseback. The horses moved away from them, but they weren't particularly terrified. We didn't see anything terribly dangerous. We didn't see any major injuries or trauma. I'm sure it happens, but again, having been in many horse places, it happens anytime there are horses in close captivity or close proximity. I did think that the people working in the pens were really considerate of the horses. The horses who wanted to stay together, who wanted to stay in their family groups, stayed next to each other and went back with their family groups if they were turned back out on the range.
You found videos on YouTube and those sorts of things. When something happens on the gather, it's usually a very unpleasant thing. And then when something does happen and they get it on video, then it makes it, but they spend hours and hours where nothing happens.
I think the BLM does a good job with education. I think they're careful about who they adopt the horses out to.
I mean, I'm not opposed to adoption. I'm just opposed to these excessive numbers of animals being removed and warehoused. I mean, the majority of wild horses that are removed from the wild never find an adoptive home.
Well, what's happened is, the market's pretty saturated, the economy is bad, and there's a lot of horses on the range. And so, if we don't adopt them, for the most part, they're going to end up in they go out to the Midwest, which would be a beautiful place if you're a horse.
Our goal is that we would restore the millions of acres that have been taken away from these animals, that we will take the short-term and long-term horses that are healthy enough, and we will let them go back to freedom. We will then erase a lot of the debt that has been occurring. I think it's 60-some% of the BLM's budget goes to feeding horses that have been captured. And millions and millions of acres have been taken away. Our goal is to have the herds that remain be genetically viable, that they're big enough to survive into the future. I'd love to see us be able to take down the fences that have been built for cattle allotments, to shift cattle from one place to another, to make the horses free roaming again the way they were. I'd like to see them as unmolested as possible. I'd like to see the predators protected in wild horse herds.
if we can reduce the frequency of gathers, that would be ideal.
And is it better to be confined in a barn or a pasture, or to live free? Their lives may be shorter, but they certainly are, they're living the way they're supposed to live.